All right, I'll get started. So the other thing I want to talk about, well, two things I want to talk about today. One is I'll go over, I just recently updated the release schedule, so we'll go over that real quick. And then the second is we're going to basically borrow Python's uh, PEPs as a way of kind of some adding a little bit of formalism to HDF5's governance. So let's talk about the release schedule. So I updated it. I left 2023 on here so that people can see what happened to 1.8 and 1.10 and 1.12. I'll leave that up until we get into 2025. But I did extend this out into 2025. So I updated it with the actual release dates of our 1.14.4 releases. 1.14.5 will be in September. 1.14.6 will be in April. So 1.16. So we've discussed in a couple of meetings um, that we'd like to have a 1.16 release. So 2.0 is coming along. That'll have bigger features in it. Things like the multi-thread HDF5 and things like that. But in the meantime, there's some stuff that we would like to get out. The most compelling of which is complex number support. So we'd like to get that out before 2.0 will be ready. So we'd like to have that soon. It would probably the plan for that release is for it to be as easy of an upgrade as possible from 1.14. So that because I plan to cut off 1.14 support, I don't want to keep 1.14 and 1.16 going at the same time because they'll just be almost exactly the same except for a few minor things. So right now that's penciled in for the spring, but my target is to have that shortly after 1.14.5. We'll do 1.14.5. That'll be the last 1.14 release. That'll include whatever bug fixes we have up to that point. And then about a month after that, we would release 1.16, and that would be the end of the 1.14 line. And then we'd have a 1.16.1 release in the spring. So basically, this would just kind of slide down by 6 months. So, and then we'll just be on a regular 1.16 cadence until HDF5 2.0 is ready. And I do not have a target release date for that. It's really going to depend on the biggest feature that will go into that will be multi-threaded HDF5, and we'll see how that plays out over the next year or so. So I've updated the table here. So 1.14.5, one of the things I want to focus on for that is OSS fuzz. There's a bunch of issues in there. It's about maybe, I think the official count is about 20, but many of those are not real. They don't stick around. They're not really reproducible. So there's probably about a dozen in there that we need to get cleaned up. Also, some read-only S3 VFD improvements. I've been going over the read-only S3 VFD and cleaning it up so that we can extend it in the future and do performance testing on it and things like that. 1.14.6 would be the last maintenance release of 1.14. I don't have any compelling features for that. It would just be whatever bug fixes and other security type things that come along. 1.16 will include complex number support. And one of the things I would really like to do is update the library defaults. So a lot of the things like cache sizes and default sizes for many things were set a long time ago, back in the late 90s. And the hardware was very different then, and computers had different size things, less memory, less space. They use spinny disks. Now we use SSDs. A lot of stuff is in cloud storage now. So it's about time to go through and reevaluate what we picked as the defaults to re-optimize things for the cloud, for modern storage systems and things like that. So that's the one thing that I think will potentially push 1.16 to later, is that if we don't have time to really do that justice. I don't want to do that quickly and then have to reset defaults later because it turns out we picked the wrong ones. And so I'm not sure if we'll have the time to really study that carefully before the fall, but we'll try. So that's 1.16. Then in 2.0, I've got all the forward-looking stuff. I've got multi-threaded HDF5, the crash proofing data journaling thing that we discussed before on the channel. The VFD swimmer, which is really full swimmer. The VFD is not the best name for it. We have encryption. We got a grant to encrypt at about the page buffer level, so that might show up in there. Digital signatures for objects, semantic versioning, lifeboats, sparse data work potentially would go in here. So that's all that'll potentially be a very big release with a lot of features in it. So definitely one to look forward to, and definitely one worthy of the 2.0 everything is different now moniker. So, and some of these things may be released in a 116 release. For example, the VFD swimmer has all the things that it needs in the library now. So we do not need to change any important structures that are public or API calls or anything like that. So some of these things may show up in a 116 release ahead of the 2.0 release. So that's what I have for the release schedule. Are there any questions? A lot of exciting stuff coming. Be really cool.
It will be cool.
Whole different HDF5 world in a couple of years.
So the complex number thing, I mean, I have a handful of people who are really interested for this. But these are big projects that were waiting on complex numbers. And would that basically be a recommendation that they use development branch?
So if you're using develop, you can do that, but remember this is the development branch.
No,
So
I know, but that's what I'm asking.
I wouldn't use that as a production branch. I wouldn't create files that I anticipated keeping around for a long time. It's really for testing. Until we actually officially release something, things are subject to change. So you could create files that would be unreadable in the future.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, these are projects that once get going, it's difficult to sort of then walk back.
Mhm.
And knowing that we'll have complex numbers, I don't know what, in a couple of days PR, and then essentially whatever happens with that, and then
Mhm.
wait until April 2025 to actually become an official release. That's a little.
I would say that more realistically, you're looking at October.
For what, October?
October of this year.
Oh, sorry, but what? I lost. I didn't hear.
October would be when we probably release 116. That's my
Okay.
plan. Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right.
That's like 6 months earlier than you've got here, though.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we generally release on like the 6 month mark,
Okay.
right? They are 6 months apart. I'm not a big fan of, I mean, releases are not free, right? It's not, we can't just click the button and, oh, hey, here's a release, right? It's a lot of testing. And that costs staff hours and time and stuff like that. I don't want to just every time some compelling thing comes along that a person needs, we don't just click the button.
No, I wasn't saying anything like that. I'm just saying the little green bar on the bottom starts in May.
Yes, I'm trying to I'm under promising and over delivering. Right. I mean, the thing that I really would like, I don't want to just have like 116. I mean, the only reason that we have to have 116 for complex number support is an internal version number has to get bumped in order for it to work. And so even though you can't see it, you'll see the effects of it. And so, I mean, that seems to be a kind of a weak reason to have a major release,
It
right? We
is
try to get
technically not
something
needed.
else in there. There's a few other things, right? I changed the HD off T is now public type, stuff like that. Um, so there's a few minor things, but I think also too, one of the things I would really like to see is is options that are set to default for cloud optimized HDF5. And so,
It's a big deal. That would be a
yeah,
very important thing. Yeah.
and because I think that's also going to be, in general, those would be better options, better default options for modern storage systems than what we have now.
Mhm.
So, but in order for it, like, and again, like, I'd like to have the time to test this and make sure that we're doing the right thing. But is there enough time? We only have 2 months. It's not a lot of time, and we have a lot of other stuff going on. So it's hard for us to find the resources to do that. So
here's another thing for the schedule / milestones, however it divvies up. Assuming I get the thread safety stuff done in August, September, the next thing I would move on to would be improving the page buffering to really make it fully productionized, recoverable when you open the file and it knows about paging and all that. That's going to be not trivial, but not completely justifying shoving it off to 2.0. Is it something that you would consider acceptable for a 16.1?
depends on what changes.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if it's a thing, right, that doesn't
Be fully backward compatible, right? It just will mean that old versions of the library won't get the benefits and potentially may not be able to read a file, or at least variations around wouldn't get the benefits of the feature.
well, if you make it so that something's not readable by like, so if something wouldn't be readable by 1.16.0, then we have to bump the major version.
Okay.
So we'd have to have a 1.18 release. But again, like, are we gonna like bump the are we gonna have a new major release? I mean, major releases cause a lot of people pain.
Oh, absolutely, right. And I don't
Right.
want to delay 1.16, for this
Right.
bunch of work. So I think maybe that's one of our design goals for that page buffering feature is make certain that it's possible to slipstream it into the 1.16 releases so that people can get the benefits of it well before 2.0.
Right. Yeah, I mean, historically we've gone about 3 years between releases. And so this would be the 1.14 release was in 2023. And so we would be kind of about on time, right, if it were in 2025. And so 2024 is early for a major release.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's great. I just foresee dropping more major features in more rapidly in the future for many good reasons, right? The HDF Group is doing more work. You've mentioned a bunch of things, and potentially Lifeboat, potentially NVIDIA here, and just thinking about versioning, it might be worthwhile to think big picture. The PEP process would probably help, like how can we make certain we do this smoothly and people know what's coming, things like that.
I am hesitant though to so if for example somebody's like, okay, we know this is coming, so the public struct has to get modified in this way. I'm hesitant to do that before the feature is actually complete.
Oh yeah, same.
Because I mean we had this problem with the Vol, right? Where there was stuff that was just kind of like, we think this is gonna need to go here, and then we might wind up breaking it later. And so there's this like vestigial stuff in 112 Vol, right?
Yeah, and I'm not trying to get there. I'm just saying when there is a fully developed thing that's like an important piece of work, do we maybe in the 2.0 era, I don't know, hypothetically, we make it more possible for people to put a more major feature into a 2.1 and a 2.2, and we don't stress as much about that quote unquote being a major release because it looks more like a minor release.
Well, but when we go to semantic versioning, that would be right. It'd be major minor patch.
Yep.
So, I mean, as far as like, I mean, if it weren't for people who had integrated our software, I would just release. I would be totally okay with if 1.16 released in the fall, and then some compelling feature came along in the future, like a year later, right? And we're like, okay, well now we got to do another major release. I'd be fine, right? Like as long as I don't have to maintain multiple lines, I don't really care, right? That's fine with me. But I think the problem is that people who have to integrate into our software, that causes them a lot of consternation because now we're not supporting that old stuff anymore. And so, so then, they don't get bug fixes and stuff unless they go through the pain of upgrading.
Right, that's why I was kind of thinking maybe it's something for the 2.x releases that we just kind of aim for and coach the community around saying, hey, there are going to be a little bit bigger bumps now that we're shifted into this zone of the world.
Yeah, but there's people who really do value stability,
I am.
right? And they really want, especially like the HDF5, right? I mean, we've been around with the same API for a long time. The kinds of things that were used in our are oftentimes pretty conservative pieces of software, right? So, we don't want to
Absolutely, right.
willy-nilly.
So
But
maybe we need to go think about this in advance.
but the world moves on, right? And for us to keep the lights on at the company, for us to be competitive with other data storage systems and stuff, I think that we really need to move to getting new features in sooner rather than later at a much quicker pace than we have in the past. And that may mean that some people are going to have to, just decide to support stuff or not. So, or to upgrade or not to the newer versions of the library. So we'll see.
I would be happy about that, but at least when you open up two version numbers, in the 2.0 era, there's the possibility of saying, well, we can keep 2.1.x alive for 6 months or a year, while 2.2 and maybe 2.3 come out during that period of time. Long-term support branches are common in other pieces of software.
Yeah, and we could do that. We could decide that we're going to have like an LTS version of HDF5. Supporting multiple versions of HDF5 at the same time really sucks. Like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It starts to be, as they diverge, it becomes really difficult to move things down. I mean, maybe Linux is easier because they're just versioning individual pieces of software, right? But for us, we're underneath, we're trying to keep the code in sync. It just becomes a nightmare. That time where we had 1.8, 1.10, 1.12 and develop all going at the same time, like that was not fun. And we wind up burning an enormous amount of staff hours supporting that. And why? Right? So it's especially, I mean, I think one of the things that the HDF5 really needs is a comprehensive migration guide. We really haven't been doing a great job of keeping the user guide updated and adding to it. And I think that one of the things that it really needs in that is a chapter that talks about versioning, because we have some nice features for people who want to stick to a certain version or a certain file format or whatnot. You can do that, right? And so there's nice stuff in there to enable people to do that. So people should be able to update to newer versions of the library and still keep the API that they want or the file format that they want. So, but I think that it's not commonly known how to do that, right? They just see, oh, there's a version, and then they update, and then everything breaks, and then they're sad. And so, if we had a migration guide and publicize that, I think it would be easier for people.
Yeah.
People perk up when they're like, oh, I have to update to 1.14. And I'm like, no, you just keep the 1.10 API if you want. It's easy, right? Just build the library this way and set this, and it'll all work basically the same. If it doesn't, let us know, because we're supposed to work the same. So maybe we can run faster, right? We just need to do more education, but it's a lot of people to educate. So we'll see. But I feel like a lot of people get HDF5 through like a package manager, and then maybe they'll control that. So
yeah.
But speaking of governance, one of the things that we've kind of, I don't want to say really have a problem with, but in the past we came out of a cathedral, right? Where the HDF group, back in the 90s, right, there was no GitHub. And so HDF5 was developed, I think, like a lot of other software at that time, where you had your internal CVS server, if you even had that, and then you released software as a tarball occasionally. And um, now everything is, people are expected to behave much more like the Bazaar model, where you have more public participation and people contribute and bring patches in. And now we have multiple companies that want to contribute non-trivial blocks of code. And so one of the things I would like to have is I would like to have some sort of governance of what happens in the HDF5 library. And I also know that I don't want to spend the next like 2 years of my life writing all this documentation and coming up with this stuff. So I want to borrow somebody else's. And so I think the one that I'm going to use is Python's PEP system. So they've got this, the way they have it set up, you can go look at like their index, for people who aren't familiar with it, is they have these documents that are created that cover things like that. There's several different kinds that they're showing here. There's like, I'll make this bigger. There's governance PEPs that are about the governance of the Python project, packaging PEPs, release PEPs, typing PEPs. So there's all these different types that are for here, this is a better one. The standards track PEP, informational PEP, process PEP. These are the different types that they use. Some are about like coding standards, some might be language features, some might be how the Python organization is going to work. And they bring them all together in one thing, and it's all kept in GitHub. They've got this PEPs repo. And from this, they generate all this nice documentation here. And so luckily, all of this is, go to the bottom here, down here. Yes, public domain or under the Creative Commons universal license, whichever is more permissive, which means I can wholesale steal all this, which is great. So my plan is to not clone their repo, because that's going to drag in all their history and stuff, but grab all their infrastructure from here that will make all this nice documentation and have all the stuff set up, and then basically take their PEP1 here, which tells you how everything works, and modify it so that it works well for our little organization. And I hope to kick this off at the time of the hug. Probably take me a couple of weeks to put all this together and get it going. And the first one would be this, and then the second one would probably be something like coding standards or something like that. And then Elena has told me that she wants to try to do the sparse data stuff with one of the PEPs. I'd be like PEP3 would be the sparse things. So so if people are familiar with the Python PEP process, it seems to work well for them. It's been battle tested for a decade and a half, however long they've been doing the PEP system, 2 decades maybe. So it's been around for a while. So I feel like we're coming from a system, we're starting with a system that works. And so and one that I don't have to, I don't have to create all of this. I would just go to ChatGPT and have it fill it in or something. But like I would much rather use something that basically has a lot of boilerplate that I can take, and all this nice documentation that it generates for you from the raw stuff in the GitHub repo, and all the procedures. And so I'm looking forward to getting that in there. And I think this would be a nice way of keeping the chaos down as we move to a world where more people are contributing to HDF5. And I'm hoping that this will make HDF5 more welcoming for people who want to add to the software. Because now there'll be one spot where if you want to know how things work, you can just kind of go in there and start digging around and reading. And just like you could with Python, the Linux kernel has similar types of documentation. So yeah, so like I said, another maybe 3-4 weeks or so to get this up and running, and then I'll introduce it possibly at the hug, which unfortunately I will not be at, so it'd be kind of, I have to probably pre-record something. I'll be on vacation. But yeah, any questions?
I think this is great. This will be a big help to help broaden the audience and bring more people in, as you say. I was thinking maybe it would be valuable to, at least for people who are more external to the core team, have a core team ambassador or mentor get assigned to external PEPs so that people can get some guidance about how to make their PEP be great.
Oh, they have that in here. There's if you look in here, there's like a thing where it talks about if you're putting something in here, um, and you are not a member of like, the one of the core teams or core organizations, then you need like a
Or something. Did I see that?
yeah, there's I can't remember where it was. It was but there is submitting a PEP. If none of the authors are core developers, then they will need to find a sponsor.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So yeah, I think that that's wise, right? That like really, it depends, right? Like if somebody came along and there was a really small one, because eventually I assume there'll be a library of these things. And so if somebody did come along and they had something and they said, I'd really like for this to work this way, and they had kind of copied one of the other, that'd be fine. I'm not gonna be too pedantic about it, but I think for if somebody wants to come in and implement a feature, and had not done so before and wanted to submit a PEP for it, then yeah, it'd be best to have a sponsor.
Yeah. Cool.
Smooth everything along.
So how are you going to call it? HEP?
I know that's like the hardest part, right? Because it's like H and 5 just don't go in front of EP, right? So HEP it just sounds bad and like HEP.
NumPy has improvements, so we could call it HIPs.
I thought about calling it H5 PEPs and then telling people that the P is silent, right? The P doesn't stand for anything. It's like Harry Truman's middle initial, right? Because I mean, because then people can refer to them as PEPs, and it's similar to the Python stuff, and you kind of get that connotation that goes with it. But yeah, it's just the naming part is the hardest part right now. I was gonna go for a walk this afternoon and try to come up with something.
Yeah, get out the thesaurus around enhancement and improvement, and I think HIP would be fine. HDF5 improvement proposal. But, sure.
The other thing is also, have you made the decision about Markdown or restructured text, or it's
I'm just
early?
gonna use exactly what Python's using. So it's gonna be exactly what they have. I'm not gonna change it because like why would I change it? I just don't care. Right? Like I mean in the context of this, it doesn't matter. And if somebody really wants to have we talked about this at the last HDF 5 working group meeting. And if somebody comes along and they want to have like say like one of the concurrency things, right? So Lifeboat's gonna come along, they're gonna have a whole bunch of like concurrency stuff that they're gonna add to they're gonna have I'm sure I would assume at some point they'll have a like either the sparse data structure stuff or the their concurrency stuff. That'll be in some sort of HDF5 PEP. And to put that in Markdown would not be great, right? So if somebody wants to create some sort of like RFC-ish type of thing in PDF and then refer to that, then I think that's fine. And we'll just have to figure out what we want from that, right? And I'll take a look and see like what Python does. Like, I mean, like what are the most complex PEPs that have been submitted and gone over, right? I assume that there's stuff in there where they talk about managing memory and state and stuff like that, and they want diagrams and things. And so
Just Slack be the one for the removing the GIL. I bet that's giant and complex.
okay, that's cool. Yeah, because that would be something to look at to see what they did. But I would not be opposed if somebody came along and wanted to create like a big, as long as the document was comprehensible and laid stuff out in a way that made sense. Like I'm not gonna, again, I don't want this to be overly pedantic, and I don't want it to get in the way of people doing work. What I want it to be is kind of a guideline I want it to be a central clearinghouse for all the organizational stuff. I think that that's one of the big strengths of this PEP process. And then I also want to use it as a way of reducing conflict if people are trying to do things in different ways, right? As you know, if somebody's coming from some other organization and that organization wants to do something differently, I just want to be able to tap the sign and be like, hey, no, this is how the guidelines are here, and here you go, right? In terms
Right.
of just everything, like whether it's licensing or coding style or how testing works or whatever, right? Like we can put all of that stuff in here, and that's just kind of the way that it goes, and then there's a process for changing it. And in a way that also feels fair, right? That I don't want to feel like the HDF group just does a whole bunch of ad hoc stuff and confuses everybody and makes it difficult for people to coordinate with them. So,
Well, the reason I'm asking is because that restructured text is not, what you're now going to adopt is more than 10 years old. An opinion and view of what was back then the right way and the sort of state of the art. It's not
I mean,
something recent. Perhaps you're
yeah,
going even more than maybe even 20 years. I don't know, but
sure.
it's been around.
RSC
Care.
is nice though. It's really pretty nice.
Yeah, but I mean, do we care, right? I mean, I look at this and this looks pretty. The way that it looks like to me, it just looks like Markdown, right? And so like it's just to me, it's like some other flavor of Markdown, right? And RST versus Markdown is not as awful as like different flavors of regular expressions, in like different languages and stuff. So like, yeah, who cares, right? Like,
Well, I mean, again, it depends how far you want to take it. Do you want to be base for, things again that's going to last longer and be able, if someone shows up and willing to use it to support that? That's what I'm saying.
yeah,
Who doesn't like it and he's not to use, they're going to submit whatever document in whatever format. That's fine. That's okay. I'm just thinking about not limiting ourselves to something that was 17 years ago, looked like the very best, and now we know that it's not. The other thing is also people. Yes, it's all text markup. You can Google if you are crafty. You don't need much, but Markdown is in a lot of places restructured text is in a less. So people may be more familiar with Markdown than restructured text, if that's how they're going to do it. But as I say, that's my view. The last thing I want to ask is, and that's something that I found in my experience with HDF RFCs so far, is that there was no clear bridge between this was an RFC and now we did something with this RFC and implemented it in the library.
oh, I
Like,
am absolutely not.
so is that going to be the final version of any of these HIPs, whatever we call them? Is that going to be considered the documentation of the implementation in the library, or there will be something that says this is whatever this document, the actual thing that happened in the library is here, there, whatever, that kind of thing?
So the way that it worked at the HDF group for a long time, I've not ever been a fan of. And that was you would write an RFC, right? And then that would go around and in theory be passed around to other people and then come back. And then from that document, you would then try to implement that in the library. And then there was this idea that we would go back and update the RFC with what was actually done. And I always thought that was weird and bananas, and that's strange, right? The RFC is like is kind of what you want to do, and then when you actually implement the feature, then you should create a separate internals document. You should have a user guide entry if necessary, and then you have reference manual entries. And so you create real documentation, not like some RFC that's going to float out in space and like get lost or right. And I feel like that's been the case, right? Is that we have there's the HDF5 documentation is scattered among way too many documents, many of which are old and they're never kept up to date, right? So even if you go back in, if you implement the foo features, or here's my foo RFC, and then later I'm gonna update the RFC with the what actually happened, which makes it a very confusing document if you go look at the ones where that's actually happened. And then time's going to go on, and people are going to change all that stuff, and the foo RFC sits around and never gets updated. And I'm not a fan of that at all. And so I assume that what we're going to do is what what they do with the PEP stuff is the PEP stuff is basically we argued about it. This is what we said is the way it's going to work. And you can go in and you can update these things, but they also have their own internal documentation and things like that. And so I would assume we're going to try to keep that somewhat in sync. You know, like in the documentation, you could say that this operates, you know, based on the decisions that were made in PEP 46, right? So we'll have to figure that out as we go along. But I do not consider RFC type documents to be real documentation. They're proposals,
Well,
right?
I'd like to see that the RFC, the old school RFC became more lightweight and was a proposal rather than a specification as if you could possibly specify all of it in advance. And then, like you say, post facto, you write a doc that says what you actually did, what you got.
But what I would prefer to have is real internals documentation.
Yeah,
We
would be
started
nice.
that. We have some architectural documentation, but that's kind of more high level, I think. And what I would really like to see is more low level, developer level documentation for somebody who wants to go in and work in the library. I think that's one of the biggest impediments to working on the HDF5 library is that there's very little documentation about how the library actually works. And so for a lot, if you want to do non-trivial work in the library, you really have to be good at reading source code and inferring how a system works from the source code, which is challenging because a lot of it is just oral tradition. So, which is not an ideal way to pass down technical knowledge.
Yeah, the HIPs, PEPs, whatever's will help.
Oh, But one of the things I've always wanted to do is to really have developer level internal documentation that's lives with the code like Doxygen and can be kept updated as people work on the code. Because if it's not with the code, it'll never get updated. It has to be close to the code so that when somebody's, you know, grepping through the code looking for terms and stuff like that, they'll see, oh, well, this is also referenced in this in the user guide or in the reference manual.
Yeah, the critical thing there is with those has always been a stiff backbone for reviewers who will not let code changes come in without appropriately updated documentation.
Which becomes easier once you actually have all the stuff in place. Not like, for example, now that we have reference manual entries for everything, right? It's real easy if somebody creates a public function to just point at it. I mean, you see it in code review and be like, hey, just, you know, put some Doxygen in there. And see, it can't go in until there's Doxygen. And so it's much easier to have that bar when there's existing examples. Same thing with the user guide. If somebody were to really like add a big feature, like, I mean, I feel like the user guide has been very neglected. And I would really like to, over the next year or two, like really give that thing a thorough overhaul, starting with the most critical stuff. I mean, like stuff like how to optimize HDF5, like that needs to have a section in the user guide. It's incredibly important. And a lot of stuff just isn't there. If you want to find out about certain features, you have to go dig up some goofy old RFC, which is buried in the HDF5 doc GitHub. You know, or you know, now they're linked.
Are you going to merge in the user guide into the repo again?
The user guide is in the repo.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. Alan did that like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fun. Now we just have to go through and clean it up, right? And just start going through bit by bit. And there's obvious low-hanging fruit for that, right? Things like the new VFDs. I mean, by new, I mean like 110, right? A lot of that stuff never got documented. It has reference manual entries, and there's like stuff out there, but it's not a real part of the user guide. The new data types, right? We should update the data type section.
Yep.
The new style references and all that other stuff. Anyway, I have to jump to another meeting. But anyway, I'm excited. I think that the PEP thing will be handy. I'm excited to look at a list of really cool features for HDF5 2.0. I think that'd be if we can pull it all off in a couple of years, the HDF5 will have a lot of really nice new functionality that I think will really that's some of it has been asked for so long. It'll really be nice to see some of that stuff come to life.
Very much.
Cool. All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a good 4th of July weekend.